Hello and welcome to our third week of Bible class. Hope you're doing well wherever and whenever you're watching this. But we are here talking about the birth of Moses for our third week. So our first week we talked about creation. Second week we talked about the fall into sin. This week we're talking about the birth of Moses. And we actually don't know how much time has elapsed between the creation of the world and the fall into sin all the way until the birth of Moses. Moses is where we finally kind of start getting, and I guess before that, Abraham, something to match up a little bit with our history. So about the year 2000 is normally what we ascribe to Abraham. And then we know that the children of Israel were in Egypt about 400 years or so. So between Joseph being sold into slavery, going down into Egypt, bringing all of his brothers and family down away from the promised land in order to avoid that big famine. If you are a little bit fuzzy on that story, go back, read the last 20 chapters of Genesis or so. But all that happens, and then 400 years later, we get to Moses. Joseph is the end of the book of Genesis. And today we're starting off in the beginning of the book of Exodus. So the book of Exodus starts out like this. It says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel when they went down in Egypt." So kind of a recap of, hey, remember everyone went down in Egypt and there was Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Zebulun and Benjamin and Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all, and Joseph was already in Egypt. So about 70 people came down from the promised land into Egypt at the time of Joseph during that famine. Verse 6, "Now Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them." Now, when the Bible adds on those things, right? It's not like there were a lot of Israelites. No, 5 different things. 5 different things the Bible says here to show how much these people grew in the 400 years. Right? They were fruitful, they multiplied greatly, they became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Sorry, 4. But so many people. When they leave, we hear that there are 600,000 fighting men of that fighting age. So usually that's men between, maybe 16 years old, and at the top end when you're able to fight, maybe 50. Okay, so of that subset of the population, the males that were in military service, about 600,000, and then we extrapolate that out to include women, children, and then older men as well. Roughly 2 million people are going to leave Egypt. So from 70 to 2 million in about 400 years. Grows pretty quickly. Anyway, verse 8, "Then a new king who did not know about Joseph came into power in Egypt. 'Look,' he said, 'the Israelites have become too numerous for us. Come, we must deal with them shrewdly, or they will become even more numerous if war breaks out. We'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave our country.'" So this week, to help you teach this Sunday school lesson to your children, or just to get a little bit more insight into the lesson on the birth of Moses, we're going to look at 4 people in 3 sets. You'll understand. So the first one is we're going to look at Pharaoh. Right? We hear Pharaoh here. He's referred to as the king of Egypt at this time. Later he's going to be called Pharaoh. Again, whoever's in charge, the ruler at that time. And you'll notice when this person comes into power, he doesn't understand his history. He doesn't understand what Joseph had done, that the God of the Israelites had warned Joseph in a dream that this big famine was going to come, and that Pharaoh had not only saved the Egyptian people, but also people from all over the world. That if you read through what happened in that history, is all the people, when they needed food, they sold their land, and Egypt was able to grow in this incredible amount of power 400 years ago. But this Pharaoh, for whatever reason, if it was the history had been lost, he didn't really care about learning about something that happened 400 years ago. But for whatever reason, he didn't know who Joseph was. So he looks around and he sees all of these different people that are there, this massive amount of people, and he's concerned. He's not concerned, though, that he's going to lose his power. He's not concerned that these people are going to overthrow Egypt. Because come on, it's Egypt. I'm the king of Egypt. We're the greatest superpower ever. These people aren't going to overthrow us at all. But what he is concerned is that they're going to leave. That they're going to lose their lower working class, these farmers, these people that are out there, that at least the Egyptians view them as a lower class, lower race of people that are different. They only worship one God. They eat, well, I guess the kosher laws wouldn't be in effect at that time, but they were not Egyptians. Egyptians, they thought, were the superior race. And the Israelites, well, those were the Israelites, okay? They're kind of definitely second-class citizens compared to them. So he's afraid, well, you got this big group of people, they're going to join together with some enemies, and then these people are going to leave and we're not going to have them anymore. So what does he do? First of all, he decides, all right, let's put slave masters over them. We're going to grind these people down. We're going to put them into forced labor. We're going to make them work so hard. We're going to work them to death. And if you know this story, you know what happens, right? That the people, they get more numerous. They get more fruitful. They fill the land even more. So Pharaoh realized, okay, well, that didn't work. That didn't work. What should we do? And then he moves on to saying that the midwives should go out, and we're going to talk about them in just a second, and put all the males to death. Now before we leave talking about Pharaoh, there's kind of a lot of discussion about who this guy is, okay? People always want to pinpoint it down. A couple of things we do know about Pharaoh. He seems to be right around the 18th dynasty that's in Egypt. And we don't know exactly who he is. We don't know if he's Amenhotep or someone said Thutmose III. I'm not pronouncing that correctly. It's Thothmes the first. And the Bible does not clearly say who he was. And the Egyptians are not going to record who Moses was, right? Who this person was that wiped out all their army in the Red Sea. So this bit of information has just been lost to us. We're just not completely sure who he was. But what we do know about Pharaoh, right, is Pharaoh is considered to be like a living image of the gods. Ramses means son of Ra. Ra was their sun god. Another famous one would be Amenhotep, which means living image of Amen, okay, which is also kind of a deity of the sky that's up there. So when Pharaoh was there, people view him as one of the gods who they are going to listen to. And this is going to be very important when we move into what the midwives are going to do. What we do know about Pharaoh, some things that people get wrong, right? One is the Hebrews did not build the pyramids. We're going to hear the places that they did build up. They built up these two cities, Pithom and Ramses, as store cities for Pharaoh. Those would have been like treasure cities that they would have built up, done some building projects there. But the pyramids that were built are from the old kingdom, the old dynasties of Egypt, and it would be like 700 to 1,000 years before the Israelites even got down into Egypt. So those are not the things that they're actually building. But still, the fact that they're in this forced labor having to build these bricks, okay, building store cities, that their labor is still very, very, very difficult. And all being forced by this evil earthly authority called Pharaoh, in charge of the Egyptians, trying to oppress and not completely destroy, but just really get the Israelites under his thumb. Control their population, control their mentality, so that they just remain subservient to the Egyptians, who they believe to be much more dominant and have a much closer connection to who the Egyptians believe to be the true God, which we're going to find out with the plagues is not the case. Now, Pharaoh realizes that his plan doesn't work, so he goes and he finds these two women. He finds Shiphrah and Puah. And Shiphrah and Puah says are the midwives to the Hebrew people. Now again, if you have 2 million people, it's very doubtful you're only going to have 2 midwives that are going out there to help with all the births of the children. Okay, I mean, think of our area up here in Reno, right? We're 300,000 people, roughly. Maybe it's even larger than that. 300,000 people. If you only had 2 midwives or 2 doctors that would help with childbirth, that would not be enough. So it's possible that they were the ones that are in charge of this group of people to go out and help. They do have names that are more of the Egyptian origin than of the Hebrew origin for their language. So it's possible these are Egyptian women that were assigned to go help, or they could have been Hebrews that were given Egyptian names. But whatever the case, these 2 women are told by Pharaoh, I want you to go, and when you are helping the Hebrews give birth to their children, if it's a male, put it to death. If it's a female, let it live. And they're either supposed to do it or pass this along to their community. Well, what do Shiphrah and Puah do? They don't listen to Pharaoh. They don't listen to Pharaoh, and they go and they just let all the babies live. Well, just that decision itself, right? The decision to not listen to Pharaoh, not listen to someone who claims to be a living image of the God. And you could say they did it, I mean, there's a number of reasons. They could have done it because they really did believe in the one true God and realized, no, the Hebrew people should live. They could also just realize it's wrong. I mean, it doesn't take anybody, really. You don't have to be a Christian to know, okay, listen, when someone's born, if they're a male, you should put them to death. That's a wrong thing to do. These women might have just had that moral capacity to say, this is terrible. I'm not going to do that. And Pharaoh hears that they are not putting these women or putting these children to death. So he calls them back in and he says, what's going on here? Why aren't you putting to death these male children? And what do Shiphrah and Puah say? They say, well, those Hebrew women are so strong that they're giving birth to their children before we even show up. Which would have matched with what Pharaoh thought of these people, right? He's tried to put them to death by exhaustion. He made them make their own bricks without even giving them straw. And what happens? Instead of these people getting weaker and getting beaten down by all the work, they seem to be multiplying even more and getting stronger. So if he thinks that of the people, he believed the lie. Right? Shiphrah and Puah were not put to death for disobeying a command. So he must have believed them that this actually happened. But a lot of people, when we hear this, right, we think of what Shiphrah and Puah did. They go into this big kind of moral dilemma, thinking about, is it okay to lie in certain situations? Right? Is it okay to lie if you are actually protecting someone's life? So people will bring up examples of like the Holocaust, right? That people are protecting Jewish people that were hiding from the Nazis. Is it okay if, they knocked at your door and said, are there any Jewish people here? And you said no. Is that the right thing to do? They go into other moral dilemmas, right? Is it okay to break normal laws and commands if the motive is correct, right? Is it okay to steal a loaf of bread if your family is starving? And it gets just to this big moral debate. It's clear that these women, right, knew what the right thing to do was. We must obey God rather than men. And whether they were Christian or, in this case, right, they believed in the God of the Hebrews, or whether or not they were just moral people who were listening to their conscience, they understood that it is not okay to kill a young baby. So rather than going down the huge debate of trying to justify lies, I think it's just easier to look at this and say, listen, they're protecting life. They're not lying here, to try and get a piece of candy, right? They're not lying here to try and get a better deal on their car or for some kind of personal gain. That they are saying something and possibly deceiving Pharaoh. We don't even know if they were deceiving. They could have been telling the truth, right? But they are protecting the life of children, which they realize is the right thing to do. And they're not harming anyone. They're not harming Pharaoh. They're not harming the women. They're not harming the children. They're just protecting life. And just, rather than trying to justify some other sin, just look at the good that these women did. They protected children. And when Pharaoh hears about this, right, well, he decides, let's not keep it in the medical profession anymore. We got to make it even bigger. So now, rather than just these midwives who are going out there and at birth killing the male babies that are born, he makes this decree, right? He says, gave this order to all his people. Every boy that is born you must throw in the Nile, but let every girl live. Before we get into that, I should make one more note. Verse 20, so God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. So we do see, right, the fear of God in the Old Testament is usually a sign of someone having the true faith. So these women feared God, and God gave them families of their own. Now we don't know the age of the midwives. In ancient Greece, when there were midwives, they were women who were barren and not able to have families of their own or past the age of childbearing, so they weren't going to have any other babies. And that's when they started to help people give birth. We don't know the age of Shifra and Puah in Hebrew culture. It may not be the same. We don't have a lot of information on that. But whatever it seems that God miraculously gave these women children. So whether or not they were older past the age of childbearing or they were not able to have children themselves, God blessed them because they feared the Lord and because they did not listen to the evil decree of Pharaoh. Clearly, stamp of approval, they did the right thing by protecting life and not carrying out this evil decree. So, Pharaoh gives the order. He realizes, okay, working them to death is not going to work. Sending out the midwives to put them to death is not going to work. So now the decree to everyone, throw these babies in the Nile. And the Nile was not just a river, right? It was not just their machine of destruction here. The Nile for them was also one of their gods that they worshipped, right? The deity would have lived through the river, given them life, given them crops, which is when we get to the first plague, the Nile turning to blood. It's really this gut punch to the faith of the Egyptians to realize that their God is not as powerful as the God of the Hebrews because he can the God of the Hebrews, right? The one true God can turn this Nile River into something that can't produce crops, that cannot help them. So just taking away all of its power. But so to sacrifice these boys by throwing them into the river. And all these things happen. Terrible, right? That the Hebrews were put into slavery and forced labor, and no doubt many of them died. Terrible that Pharaoh would make this command to put people to death and command the midwives to make that moral choice. Terrible that he would command all of his people, whenever they see, right, a Hebrew baby that is born, to throw it in the Nile River and kill it. And clearly the fear is real, because Miriam, that Moses' mother, right, is protecting Moses from this, does not want this to happen to her child, hides the baby for 3 months. So this is not something that was only going on like a weekend. 3 months this is still happening. And Pharaoh's daughter is aware of the tragedy that is going on, because she has compassion on Moses when it actually takes place. So Moses' mother comes up with this plan, right? I'm going to hide the baby for 3 months, right? Keep it quiet. You can keep feeding it and sleeping. Hides the baby for 3 months. And, when babies get to be about 3 months old, they just start being louder. And she realizes, I can't hide it anymore. This is a baby boy born in this era, and someone's probably going to put it to death. So I need to protect this baby. And coming up with a plan, makes a little boat right out of reeds and tar, and she puts in the Nile River in the reeds, right? So it's not like, she throws Moses over a bridge and has him float down, just seeing where he's going to end up, but puts him in the reeds where he's not going to go very far, and seems to place him near where the bathing spot of Pharaoh's daughter would be. We don't know a lot about Pharaoh's daughter. But for Miriam to have all of this, it's possible, right? She knew that Pharaoh's daughter had some empathy for these people. Maybe she does not like the command that her father has made. And just by her reaction, that she finds out that there's this little baby boy, she realized, oh, this must be one of those Hebrew babies, and someone was trying to protect it. And then when Moses' sister comes out of the weeds and said, hey, do you want me to find someone to nurse that baby for you? She goes, yes, do that. She doesn't go home and ask Pharaoh. She doesn't clear it with anyone else. She says, no, this is what I am going to do. And even that seems, at least for me personally, seems to be a shot at her dad. Right? I know that he has made this law and this command. I know he claims to be a deity here on earth. But I am going to willfully disobey him because I want to save this child. And through all of this terrible suffering, we get Moses. And what does Moses get? Moses gets an education that nobody else got, right? None of those Hebrews were going to the schools that Pharaoh's kids were going to, that Moses would have gotten to attend. None of them would have learned how a military works, the way that Moses got to see the inner workings of Pharaoh and read those history books, right? No one would have understood how to rule a people except for Moses. He takes a special servant and he trains him to be someone special, to use him for his purpose. And that's Moses' birth. Just extraordinary, painful circumstances, but out of that pain comes salvation. Comes God's plan for a people. No one would have scripted this way. No one would have picked history to go in this direction. But even through the terrible sins that Pharaoh did because of him thinking himself a god, not listening to the one true God, not listening to the God of the Hebrews, God still accomplishes his will. And that's something for us always to remember. That no matter what pain we are suffering, no matter how bad we think things are, that even through those terrible times, God's will can still be accomplished for our benefit, for our good, to help us and many future generations be saved. God knows what he's doing. Continue to trust in him. And thanks for tuning in this week. We'll continue on next week with our next Sunday school story. God bless you. Bye-bye.